Hello everybody and welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about the defacers, and this is all in reference to the controllers and how they like to put their stamp on structures, and also we're going to be touching on how they like to create false associations with regards to structures. But first we're going to start by looking at this phenomena called the Green Man and something referred to as Mascarons. The Green Man, what is the Green Man? You can see here this little image, the Green Man in New York City. Just reading this real quick, the Green Man can be found on many buildings in England, and the face adorns buildings in Germany, France, and other places, and it's referred to as the Green Man. And it's a face that you will see on buildings a lot of times above doors, above windows, and this particular face, it has foliage usually streaming from its face. But it can also be found in the United States, particularly in New York City. Now, prior to, I think it's like the late 1800s, this thing went unnamed. It was just a feature that no one really paid much attention to. But this person by the name of Lady Raglan, and her husband was a major apparently, who also goes by the title fourth Baron Raglan. Okay, but she wrote an article talking about this face in the late 1800s, which appeared a couple times, but she was the first person to give this face the name of the Green Man. So I wanted to see if there was if we could tie this to some group. And before I get to that, here's just one more. These are some of the faces of the Green Man in New York City. And the Green Man made a big comeback in architectural ornaments used everywhere starting in the late 1800s. So there's a lot of different variations of it, but it goes by that name. And so there's a term called Mascaron, and I know that's not the French way to say it, but I'm just going to stick with that for now. But in architecture, a mascaron ornament, it's just a face, usually human, but sometimes it's chimeric, frightening, and allegedly the function was to frighten away evil spirits so that they would not enter the building. I'm going to guess it probably has some completely opposite function, but you can just see some of these mascarons. And when I did some digging, it led me to Bordeaux, France, and this particular city is known for just an abundance of these faces, these mascarons, and nobody apart from some tourists probably seems to notice the stone faces called mascarons. Now, when you start digging into this Bordeaux, and it's referred to sometimes as the city of 3,000 faces, they're just everywhere. And here's just some of these faces, and I can't help thinking it's the controllers. They're just putting these things on structures that maybe were already there and just sort of claiming them. But when you go into the history of Bordeaux, you come across, of course, Freemasons. Bordeaux hosted more than 2,000 Masons in the late 1700s, and several Bordeaux masks or mascarons from the late 1700s show signs of Freemasonry. And we're going to take a look at this particular one here, and it's this particular address has a Masonic symbol on its chest. And so a lot of these mascarons have Masonic symbolism. So again, and that's a group we associate with the controllers. So I just wanted to point that out. I think it ties all back to them. And again, they're just a part of a much larger control mechanism. But you also find these in Bucharest as well. which is referred to sometimes as Little Paris of the East. I'm going to guess if we dug a bit further, we would find a Masonic connection there as well. But I just wanted to mention that real quick, bring that up. The Defacers, yeah, they're. I would assume these probably put on after the fact, and these structures probably were already in situ, in place. But now let's talk about the second subject here, which is going to be stained glass. We talked about the defacers. Now let's talk about the replacers, but sticking with the theme of the controllers, they might be deceiving us with regards to the association that cathedrals have with religions. And I think stained glass is one of the ways they've masterfully done that. So we're going to take a look at this real quick. So the term stained glass just refers to colored glass as a material and to works created from it. Now, it's almost exclusively associated with the windows of churches and other significant religious buildings. So, they've associated, it's so imprinted in our minds that there's this association, because of course they have all these biblical scenes being depicted. But again, we're going to delve into this. So when you look at the obscure beginnings of stained glass, right away we get into many histories of stained glass begin with Pliny's tale of the accidental discovery of glass by Phoenician sailors, and then they go into the legend recounts. So we're into tales and legends again, and when dealing with stained glass and things related to these cathedrals, these churches, and again, referring to the cathedrals, these are the same structures where when they dig down to build a car park, they find Roman bathhouses they didn't know were there. And I talked about this in a previous video. Even these organs, which are beautiful, and some of them have thousands of pipes, and when you try to go figure out why are they in all of these cathedrals, again, this is what you will find. They say it remains an enigma, and it's not clear how the organ came to be such a standard church instrument. So when I see now when we look at stained glass that's associated with these cathedrals, and we're talking about tales and legends, it's just our history suspect. So one of the oldest windows, stained glass windows, is supposed to be from this particular monastery, St. Paul's Monastery. I don't know how to, Jarrow, UK. And they were excavating. The windows were actually broken, and they were excavating in 1973, and they found all this colored glass, this stained glass. So they rearranged it, but they were blue, green, gold, and yellow pieces. So they actually rearranged, they just put them together, compiled them into collages, and you can go and view this, but it's touted as like the oldest stained glass window. So I kind of think this is sort of what actually was in all these cathedrals, and the biblical scenes that we see, I think that is a more recent addition, and I'll explain why I think that here. But so now when we go into these these bigger cathedrals and churches, you start looking into it, and you find that the stained glass windows, they were complex and illustrated the stories of the Bible and the lives of the saints. But however, the artists were not interested in how realistic the designs were. Many times they were very unsophisticated paintwork. And you go on to read the colors were often uneven and streaky. But then later on, you get to the point where they start to become more advanced, and they use perspective and other techniques that painters use. So there's this sort of evolution that happens, and I find it really interesting because you have these massive cathedrals, and completely just innovative with their designs on such a massive scale and so advanced for the time. And you look at that and you contrast that with these windows, which are of a poorer quality from an artistic perspective. It just always seemed a bit odd to me. And just knowing how the controllers like to try and make associations for us, like if these structures were from a time where things were a lot different and they're trying to make the association to religion. So that was in my mind. And then when I started reading this, well, this just kind of sealed it for me. During the 1700s, the removal of medieval stained glass was commonplace. The windows were destroyed and replaced with painted glass. So almost all of the stained glass windows with the biblical scenes that you see are modern, well, they're reproductions, probably most likely from the 17 and most likely from the 1800s. In the mid-1800s, due to the revival of the Catholic Church in England, there was a resurgence in Gothic architecture. So many new churches and cathedrals were built and many old churches were restored. So massive restoration. This resulted in the rediscovery of medieval stained glass techniques. Blah, blah, blah. So, and this is just another one talking about French Gothic stained glass windows. What they say was over 400 years. A large part of the original glass was destroyed in the centuries after the Middle Ages. Much of the glass today is restored or a more modern replacement. So everything you're seeing in all of these fancy, more realistic biblical scenes that you're seeing in all these churches are reproductions, recreations by the replacers, I believe, which is, I think, the controllers. And I think they're doing it to make us connect these structures to religions. And I should say, I am a Bible believer, or at least some of the versions, but I'm not a believer in man-made religions. And so I just want to, I am bashing on religion, man-made religions, but I'm not bashing on the Bible. So I think that this is probably closer to the reality of what was in these structures. And I'm going to touch on this in probably my next video as to maybe what I think was going on. I think they had an effect. And yeah, so I'll leave it there. But, and when we look at this, this concept of, like, they have a few tools they can use to create associations for us. One of them is stained glass. Another is frescoes, right? The churches. So I was talking about this in a previous video. In Ethiopia, in the northeast part of the country, there's this mountain chain, and there's all these rock-hewn churches, and some of them are like 1,000 feet in these mountains. And the people in these communities where these churches are, they didn't even know about these churches until the late 60s and early 70s. But when they did find them, they found these frescoes, and we're told they suspect these frescoes are from the 1400s. So I got another image here, just give you a better perspective. But again, you look at some of these frescoes, it's just, I'm not artistic, but pretty amateurish. And not only that, you look at this structure and it is weathered. And again, we're talking about 30-foot tall ceilings, and they've got cupolas and all these arches. And I mean, in its day, it would have been very impressive. But then you got something that's seemingly really well preserved in relation to the original structure, but it's of worse quality. And look at all this, whatever happened here. I don't know if this is natural erosion, but then you contrast it somehow. Again, these frescoes, they seem to be doing way better than the structure that they are in. And I'm thinking these are a recent production. much more recent than the 1400s. And you look at even in here all this weathering, and then right next to it, they're doing okay. I think these were planted, and here's another church in Ethiopia, one of these rock-hewn cave churches, and this, like, look how massive this structure is, and we're told they did this with like stone tools. And again, it's weathered, but it was awesome. A lot of engineering went into this. And then you got this sort of amateur-ish fresco, which again, really well preserved relative to the structure, which makes me think it's a more recent plant. And I talked about this in the classical art deception, Pompeii and Roman paintings. The thing with Pompeii, it was devastated by Mount Vesuvius, and you had these pyroclastic flows which get up to 700 degrees Celsius. People were just, many people died, but somehow these frescoes the heat didn't seem to affect these frescoes they found, which gave us this massive insight into the life of Romans and their day-to-day, their religious beliefs, all this. And again, I think these are a plant. And I'm starting to see a pattern here with structures that are in worse shape than the frescoes. I guess that's all I wanted to say on that. And I'll be talking about stained glass more in my next video. So I just want to do some previous video updates. So let's talk about that. Okay, the first video update, I'm going to do two here, is talking about a video I did called The Golden Age Amusement Parks and Infantoriums Part 3. And I talked about this lady, Marie Dressler. She adopted one of those incubator babies from the infantoriums, where people in amusement parks, turn of the century, 1900s, early 1900s, they had exhibits. You could see living infants. That's how they worded it. And she was this really famous person. There's Charlie Chaplin. But so she adopted one of these incubator babies, and I just doing a little more digging. In 1933, her name was Marie Dressler. She was the first woman to grace the cover of Time magazine. And yeah, I feel like there should be a question mark on that. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I got an interesting comment from Jack S. And he just was looking in the Wikipedia entry under Marie Dressler, and he said she didn't have that baby long. And he quotes this this sentence that's in her Wikipedia entry. Some sources indicate Dressler had a daughter who died as a small child, but this has not been confirmed. So it's pretty clear she did adopt a baby, and here we go. Here's one article. She adopted a baby, and here we have another one talking about the incubator baby she has adopted. So it's interesting that they're talking about her having a daughter who died as a small child. So now there's two things that I found. Well, one thing I found, but this picture I find extremely disturbing. I just want to show you this real quick. This is the stuff of nightmares right here. Look at this. I'm hoping this is like a fake prop or something. I'm hoping that's not a real infant, because that just, I don't know, something evil about that look. But this is a part that's a little disturbing. I was reading this article that I found, and I'm just going to read it for you here. So Marie Dressler, she's talking about the adopting of this child, and she's saying, I know it's a little blurry, but I'll read it here. She's just saying she adores. I simply adore babies. Now, I highlighted this portion here. What am I going to do with it? Why raise it? Of course, I've called it Marie. Now this is a really disturbing part. And if the dear little cherub survives the christening, I'll do everything on earth. I'll do everything on earth to ensure its welfare. And if the dear little cherub survives the christening, I'll do everything on earth to ensure if it survives, man, that is disturbing. I know this was over 100 years ago and you don't want to pull something out of context, but that is, as a turn of phrase, that is disturbing. I can't even imagine how, if it survives, who would say that? And when I just hear that, and then I'm reading this article, and this child there's no real reference to this child outside of this one entry. So yeah, just disturbing. This whole aspect, everything about it is just disturbing. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And there's this one other video update that I wanted to make, and it's talking about liquefaction. Now, when you have these massive earthquakes, usually if they're over a magnitude of 7, you get liquefaction happens. And now, not only do things sink or tip when you have liquefaction, but there's a process where the water underneath the ground, it gets heated and it mixes with the sediment, usually sand, and it comes up and it's squeezed to the surface as a liquid, and then it just keeps flowing, and then it solidifies back into whatever the sediment was, usually sand, but it could be clay or it could be silt. So that's what you have here, and I don't really think I mentioned that. I don't think I did a good job of describing that. So I want to play a 30-second clip just so you could see what that looks like.
Oh my god. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
So yeah, how would you like to see that in your backyard? But sometimes they refer to these things as sand boils, and this is just a photo here talking about, I think the caption on it was these sand boils in a silt-covered street after the 2011 Canterbury earthquake. So, you get all of this sediment that comes to the surface as a liquid, and then it turns back into its natural state. So, that's just something to think about, because liquefaction has a lot of different aspects to it, and this is just one of them, and I just wanted to mention that. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I guess next episode I should be hopefully hitting on this stained glass a bit more. So until next time, take care. Bye.